Hey, welcome, my friends. Mary Rose here on a Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. I love to meet with you at this day and time. It's our little rendezvous where we get together and we talk about story structure, writing craft, and the mindset of the working, thriving writer. I'm so glad to see a bunch of you here already. Anne saying hi in the comments. Terry saying hi in the comments. I wave back at you. Constanza, it's so great to see you here. Lovely to gather with you dedicated storytellers. If you happen to be watching on Facebook, there's a little thing that you can do to let me know that you're here by name, and it's going to streamyard.com/Facebook. Give permission to show your name, and then that shall happen. If you give permission, that is what is going to happen. So, hey, storytellers, how are you feeling today? Are you feeling a little sick? I hope not. Most of all, I hope that your writing isn't feeling a little under the weather, because that's our topic today. I have this sort of provocative headline: is your writing sick? But I don't mean that there's something twisted or infectious about your writing. Not at all. I know your writing comes from the heart and is meant to make the world a better place. But here's the thing. Many of us, it's almost, I want to say all of us, but we can speak in these kind of sweeping generalities and be accurate. Many of us overuse what I call symptomatic writing that focuses on the physical symptoms of our viewpoint character in order to communicate emotion on the page. I'm going to go into this in a lot of detail. I'm going to give you some red flags about what it actually looks like on the page. I'll help you learn to take its temperature, check its pulse, and just find out how it's doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think writers are so inclined to do this. And of course, I'm going to tell you what to do instead. So that is our topic today: how to just make your writing not so under the weather, create a better experience for your reader. I think that most of you will recognize this very quickly as a source of a kind of maybe cliche writing, characters who have racing hearts and churning stomachs and are always sighing and breaking out in goosebumps or chills, and things that are meant to put a little bit of urgency on the page, but start to feel kind of cliche and redundant after a while. So that's what we're going to address. I'm going to tell you why you do it and how to fix it. So I'm waving. Oh, let's see, Tracy. It's so nice to see you here, Tracy. Zooming in from Anchorage. I love it. I absolutely love it. So before we get started on our daily diagnosis, let me introduce myself to anyone who's new to the live stream or maybe is watching the replay. My name is Mary Rose Wood. I'm a writer. I'm best known for writing middle grade fiction. My most recent book is called Alice's Farmer Rabbit's Tale from Macmillan. I also wrote a 6-book middle grade series called The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place, which was published by HarperCollins. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been teaching for a long time. And in fact, I am also the founder of Path of the Storyteller. And I'm going to just, for those of you who might not be on the mailing list, I encourage you to get over to the website at www.pathofthestoryteller.com. Put your name and email address in. Watch your inbox for the confirmation email that confirms that you're on the list. And this way, you're going to be part of the gang. You'll get to hear from me once a week. And also whenever there's big news, like, for example, a new course offering or a special enrollment offer for the fall running of the Path of the Storyteller program, which I'm super excited about. So you can learn all about that stuff at the website. And please do get on the mailing list. All right, gang, going back to the comments so I can be part of this conversation. Symptomatic writing. Symptomatic writing. It's my own phrase. This isn't something that I have ever heard anyone else really talk about in quite this way. But it is the kind of descriptive writing where the writer is overusing. Right. I'm not saying that you can never use this stuff, and I'll talk about that, as we go, but is overusing these physical sensations in order to depict their main character's experience in the narrative. Now, when I talk about the symptoms, these are all going to be very familiar to you. I've actually divided them into two categories, right? The first category of symptoms that are part of this idea of symptomatic writing, I call a trip to the urgent care. All right. So, what falls under the category of a trip to the urgent care? If the text is describing the heart rate of your character in a way that is, the heart is either racing, it's stopping, it's skipping a beat, it's slowing down, it's jumping out of the character's chest. I mean, just pause for a moment and think of all the times that you may have decided to share with your reader what's going on with the heart, the physical organ of the heart in your character. Why do we do this? Well, sometimes hearts can swell with love, and hearts can feel lighter than air. You see that we immediately fall into cliche, but I would say that most of the time when we're trying to depict the activity of a character's heart, it's because we're trying to get some urgency going. So the heart might merit a trip to the urgent care for symptomatic writing. Another area where you're going to see these symptoms crop up is in the breathing of your character. Oh my goodness. How many times, if I had a nickel for every time I read a manuscript and a character sighed, sometimes they're deep sighs, sometimes they're heavy sighs, sometimes they're long, drawn out sighs. Sometimes they're audible sighs. Sometimes they're silent sighs. They just, I would say the corollary to the heavy sighs, the long exhale, the sharp inhale, right? We're often kind of meticulously describing the way the character is breathing. Their breath is coming in ragged gasps. Their breathing is slow and steady, right? All of the things. I really want you to all be honest with me, each other, and yourselves. That if you know that you've done this, or you can think of other examples of how one might describe the heart condition or the breathing rhythm of a character, please feel free to put them in the comments because it'll make me laugh. All right. So far we've got these two important, like heart and lungs, crucial organs, right? So in life, if we started to see some unusual activity, we would perhaps make a trip to the urgent care. But in fiction, we notice that our characters are often having palpitations of the heart of various kinds, or there's a lot of detail about how and if they're breathing. There are other organs in the body that also fall into this category of a trip to the urgent care. What am I talking about? The stomach. Absolutely. And with the stomach, I'm going to kind of weave together the whole digestive tract, right? Like the stomach, the gut, the belly, however you want to describe it. Now, think of all the sensations that might happen in a character's stomach. Their stomach might lurch, it might tighten up, they might have sharp pains in their belly, all kinds of things. They could become queasy. Like, I don't want to over describe this because some of you might be eating lunch as you watch this video. But the stomach also is a very expressive organ in fiction, or so it seems. It really gets used a lot. And now the last one, I mean, we could sort of go over the whole body piece by piece, but these are the big ones, all right? We've talked about the heart, we've talked about the breathing, we've talked about the stomach. But the last one is the skin. And the skin is certainly a very expressive. We can break out in a sweat. We can get a chill. We can get goosebumps. We can feel a prickling on the backs of our necks. Our hair could stand on end, right? All of the ways that the skin can express something. So I'm just going to stop there because I think you guys get the point. If in real life our hearts were racing, our breathing was, irregular, our stomach was doing flip flops, and we were covered with, goosebumps, we might well make a trip to the urgent care. Like we might want to have someone investigate what was going on with you. I want to share this. It is so cute. Constanza says, in Germany, we say we have butterflies flying in the stomach when we are in love. The butterflies in the stomach is a very, I think that's a global phenomenon. We say that in the US too. I love it. Butterflies in the stomach. Exactly. But Constanza raises a really good point, which is that we have a saying. Now, as soon as we're in the realm of we have a saying, butterflies in the stomach, a saying is beautiful. These are kind of part of cultural literacy, right? We have a saying that it's like that. But our job as writers of fiction is not necessarily to overuse the sayings of our native tongue. Because if we do that, we are trafficking in familiar language, in cliche, what I call at hand language, phrases that are like pre-washed, pre-chopped bags of salad at the store. Like you didn't make this salad yourself, you just grabbed it. It was pre-made. Does that make it a bad salad? Does it mean that saying there are butterflies in my stomach when I fall in love is bad? It doesn't make it bad, not at all. But when we're writing fiction, we want to create a certain experience for the reader that is unique and special to our book. And so it's a practice of good writing to try to avoid at hand language and come up with a way of saying what needs to be said that lives inside this book and this book alone. So that's one reason, actually, sort of underpinning this whole talk today. So I'm really grateful, Constanza, that you shared that, because the stuff that I'm saying, you can easily nod along, right? And say, well, sure. Well, don't hearts race when we're excited? And doesn't our breath get fast when we exercise? And when we're nervous, then we feel it in our stomach? Absolutely. It's not that these things aren't true. It's just that we're talking today about how to write good fiction. And this discussion is going to flag some things that fall into the category of at-hand language and talk a little bit about why the reader actually deserves more than that and why we can do a little better than that. So far, we've made a trip to the urgent care, right? This is good. We've got heart, breathing, stomach, and skin. Perhaps you can think of more, but I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to make anyone feel unwell. Now, the next thing that falls in this category of symptoms, I might say, is less medically inclined, but it still has to do with a kind of evidence in the body, I should say, that is not always our friend when we're writing fiction. And I call this one making faces. Making faces. Now, what's on the face? Our faces are incredibly expressive. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And that we can read each other's faces is an amazing thing. And people who struggle to read each other's faces, to read the faces of others, it is actually something that they really have to grapple with, because we depend so much on our ability to read other people's faces, right? We know if we think they're telling the truth. We know if we think they're being funny or serious, and we get an enormous amount of information from each other's faces. It's why texting is so hard to know what someone's tone is. It's why a phone call is nice, but face-to-face is always better, right? So let's talk about making faces in fiction. When writers get focused on the faces of their characters, this is what we see on the page. We see a lot of gazing and looking. We see characters that are always looking over there or gazing at each other or glancing up or gazing down or casting their eyes to the sky. We get a lot of what I call iography. Anyone who's been a dancer knows the term choreography. Writers will sometimes get very, very interested in choreographing the movement of the eyes of their characters. And so the gaze becomes something that's on the page a lot. We just find ourselves looking at the eyeball activity of the characters. It's being depicted by the writer. Why? We're going to talk about that too. Of course, one of the most expressive things that a face can do is smile. And so one will also see on the page writers making their characters smile. They smile again. She was still smiling. He smiled back at her smile. They gazed at each other, smiling. She dropped her eyes to the ground. He rolled his eyes upward, and their smiles. Like, I mean, this is the face, the very busy face of the fictional character, right? And then, of course, the opposite of the smile is the frown. So characters frown, their brows furrow, they clench their jaws, they grit their teeth. So busy faces. This is really this category of making faces when the face gets very, very busy on the page. So these two categories, that's as far as I'm going to go today with symptomatic writing, because I really want to focus on the why and what to do instead. But I hope that this is ringing a little bell with some of you, that if you went through perhaps a draft and you took out all of the heart monitoring, you took out all of the breath monitoring, you took out all of the churning stomachs, and you took out all of the skin stuff. I didn't even talk about the cheeks turning red, the cheeks getting warm. Just take that all. That's both skin and face, right? If you took all that out and then you took out all the moving of the eyeballs and the smiling and the frowning, like, you might have deleted a third of your draft, right? Like, it's pretty common. It's just pretty common. So again, I'm not making fun of you. I'm not casting shade on anybody. What I'm trying to point out, though, is that our drafts are likely to be full of this stuff. And it's not the best we can do. And so I want you to start to learn to notice it. Just learn to notice it. And now let's talk about why all of us do this in our drafts. Like, why all of us do this in our drafts. I'm going to get my notes up here. I'm also looking at some really interesting comments. Oh, let's see. Tracy's got a comment here. So Tracy's got a why. Tracy says, to me, it creates an intimacy between the characters without going on and on about what the face actually looks like. Interesting. So you're trying to depict by having them, I assume you mean like the glancing and the looking and the smiling, right? You're trying to portray the connection between the characters. Really interesting. Really. Constanza shares as well. I love that you guys are sharing this. My figures smile and smile and smile. Don't know why. It feels right while I write and awful when I read it. Okay, Constanza, I absolutely love that. Love the vulnerability and the truth telling. It's okay. I'm just here to tell you it's okay. It feels right when we write it and awful when we read it. So since our goal ultimately is to create a good experience for the reader, we have to know that what feels right to us when we write it is for our eyes only. And what happens then? We revise it based on what we've learned so that it's good for the reader. So now let's talk about that. Like, what happens next? We've written drafts full of the making faces, full of these urgent care, get me to the urgent care symptoms. Why are we doing it, right? Why are we doing it? What are we going to do instead? Well, let's talk about the why. Cynthia, very funny, blames all the close-ups in the movies, but she's kind of onto something, right? In terms of the face stuff. And what Cynthia is onto here is that we do it because we're trying to put emotion on the page. We really want to add emotion on the page. We want our readers to feel something. Now, as Cynthia just astutely noted, in a movie, when they want us to feel something, they give us a close-up of a movie star, and we see the movie star's lip trembling and the eyes tearing and an expressive face. And because we're humans and we respond to faces, that face triggers our emotional response because of mirror neurons. All my neuroscientist nerd friends out there can, get into this. But we have neurons in our brain that are basically designed to mirror what other people are doing. And so if we see a character really sad or really full of joy, completely horrified, maybe feeling terror, and the camera is smart in a movie and it goes right up to, and we see that face, the mirror neurons in us are like, it's scary, or we're in love. Like, we're just right in it. We are having the feeling. It's immersive. It's absolutely immersive, right? Now, here's the thing. When we are writing fiction, not stuff that's meant to be acted out by actors with expressive faces, we get paid a lot of money precisely because their faces are so expressive. We have to use language to create that mirror neuron effect. We have to use language to do it. And so we are tempted to try to give a lot of face with words. Now, can we do this? We're going to talk about how we can do it, but I want to point out to you that all of the movement of the eyes, all of the smiling and not smiling and smiling again and not smiling, actually does not come close to capturing the magic of the movie star's expressive face. There's no way, to just capture what goes on in, I don't know, Ingrid Bergman's face when the camera is 6 inches away from it. You can't say she tilted her eyes up and broke into a smile and expect me to feel the way I feel, right? When I see her gaze up at Humphrey Bogart with that look on her face, it doesn't really work the same way. So we have to use different techniques. All right. So that's one explanation. We want to add emotion and urgency to the page. Now, I just talked a bit about the face because Cynthia brought up this really good point about close-ups in the movies. But what about all that other stuff? What about all that take me to the urgent care stuff? Well, think about it. If our heart is racing, that's like a sign of urgency and emotion. If our breathing is agitated, it's a sign of emotion. If our stomachs are churning, it's emotion. If our skin is reacting, it's actually quite true that our nervous systems react to emotion. And so we do feel these things in our bodies. When we have feelings, we feel them in our bodies. Here's the problem. Let's go to Terry Finn. Terry observes still a dull choice of words. This is it, right? This is the problem. We can tell our readers the heart was racing, the breath was coming quick in ragged gasps, the stomach was churning, the goosebumps were tingling, and it doesn't have the same impact on the reader. It's not the same as them feeling the feelings. What we are doing when we over-rely on those types of at-hand language, kind of cliched expressions that in fact are cliches for a reason because they are accurately describing what our bodies do. It's just a lazy shorthand, dull language that does not have the effect that we want it to have on our reader. But you see, we have to forgive ourselves for doing it in our drafts, because what is going on when we're drafting is that we, the writer, are imagining ourselves in that predicament. And we, in fact, may be feeling some of these things, or we may know from experience that that's how I feel when I'm in a situation like that, and we put it down. But as Constanza observed, the minute you put it down on the page, it's just a stream of cliches, right? It's just a stream of cliches. So it doesn't really work. Cliches do not impact the reader the way we want them to. So we're trying to add emotion and urgency, but we're going about it the wrong way. All right. Another reason that writers litter their drafts with these kind of phrases, I'm particularly thinking of some of that face stuff, that he looked, she smiled, all on that stuff, is that their ear is telling them that there's a need for something to break up the rhythm, or that there's a need to assert whose point of view it is. And so there's a desire to just kind of check in with the main character. Maybe there's a dialogue scene going on and it's starting to feel really spare, and it's just a lot of dialogue and he said and she said, and maybe the dialogue tags are getting redundant. And so we throw in a she smiled, right? You know, we're just trying to break it up. I find that writers often make choices like this intuitively, and they often use the word flow, which I find interesting because nowhere in my writing practice or teaching do I talk about flow. But writers often think that the writing needs to flow. It needs to flow. And so when they feel like it's not flowing, they put in some stuff that's designed to help it flow. And the words that are designed to help it flow are, you know, these at-hand words. They're little kind of familiar phrases. You might think that they don't do any harm, but that's actually not true. They're not harmless. Cliches are not harmless. They waste real estate on the page. So this is the other reason why and it's, in a way, it's a more interesting one to think about it, because obviously writers want to add emotion and urgency to the page, and they kind of go about it in this rudimentary way of just depicting these physical symptoms, and it's sort of easy to see why people do that. But this other reason, I think, in a sense, is more interesting. There's a sense within the writer that something needs to happen to ground this scene into the physical, right? It's just starting to feel disembodied somehow. And so they want to get back into the scene somehow. They want to get the characters like physical experience on the page. This is a terrific impulse. If this is something that you can resonate with, I applaud you, because it is something that we're going to talk about. It's important to ground fiction into the physical reality of the fictional world. It's words on the page, but in the reader's imagination, it needs to be like a full 3D sensory holodeck experience. That's what makes a good fiction work. So if you've got that impulse, it's a good one. But resorting to the urgent care symptoms or the overuse of the face are not going to save you. So now let's talk about what's going to save you. What do we do instead? What do we do instead? And I'm going to bring Anne's comment up too. This is such a great one, Anne. Yes, looking forward to getting ideas on how to describe feelings. And Anne adds, my fear of using too much cliche language or too much exposition causes her to err on the side of not enough description of feelings. This is such good self-observation, Anne, right? We start to realize what we're doing on the page. We want to avoid cliches. We want to avoid, like overdoing it. And so we underdo it. But you use a phrase called description of feelings. And this is something that's really interesting, right? Because do we describe feelings in fiction? Do we describe feelings in fiction? I want to talk about that. And if it's any consolation, let me use your comment to remind everyone who's here live and everyone who's watching the replay that the kind of reluctance that you are feeling to put, substandard writing on the page is irrelevant when you're drafting. I'm here to tell you that everybody's draft is going to be full of all of this stuff. When we talk about writing craft, we're not talking about your process for drafting. We are talking about how you turn your drafts into fiction. Your drafts are not fiction. They're drafts. That's your sketchbook. All right. But we're going to turn them into fiction through revision by applying writing craft. And then they're going to end up being ready for the reader. But we're going to have to go through a lot of steps along the way. So see if you can lay down any fear that you might have about writing something that's got some of these, like, oh, I I watched a YouTube video with Mary Rose and she said not to do this. So, well, I don't want you to do it in your finished draft. I want you to have fixed it by then. But in order for you to fix it, you have to learn what it is. You have to learn how to spot it. You have to recognize why you might be doing it and learn what to do instead. So that's why we're here today. All right, what do we do instead? If we want to add emotion and urgency to a scene, it's one of the reasons that we do this kind of stuff in our drafts. Where does real emotion come from in a story? Where does real urgency come from in a story? It comes from the story. It comes from the storytelling. What is actually happening in the scene that you're writing? If not much is happening, then that is the problem. There's no urgency because there's no urgency. There's no emotion because nothing's happening and nothing's at stake. Now, this seems like a very obvious thing to say, but all of you know, you're also well-intentioned and have worked on this. And I know that you know from experience that it's one thing to sit down and write and have some notion that there's a story that you want to tell, but it's another thing to actually reveal the storytelling on the page in such a way that the reader can tell what's going on. It takes a bit of training and practice. I mean, this is what we do in the Path of the Storyteller program. If the events of the scene do not trigger emotion, then there's no emotion in the scene. And you can't fix that by filling your viewpoint character's body with symptoms of emotion. It's just fakery. Now, what might cause emotion to be on the page? One of the simplest examples, and I know I use it again and again, but I talk about sports sometimes because they're games with rules. And if you're watching a baseball game and you care about one of the teams, and you care a lot about one of the teams, let's say it's your favorite team. Let's say, I don't know, it's the New York Mets, just hypothetically. And in the game, your team is on the brink of winning. And then, something happens and there's a rally from the other side and they lose tragically in the ninth inning. Like they had the lead and then they lose it and then they've lost the game. You're going to feel a lot of emotion, and you're going to feel a lot of emotion without anyone telling you what to feel for two reasons. First of all, you had a team to root for. You were on somebody's side. Okay. This is so important. If the reader is not rooting for somebody in the scene, then they have no emotional investment, period. So who is the person that they're rooting for? We call that character the hero of your story. And any of my students will know how often I remind them to, could we please really get to know your hero better? Could we find out enough about your hero so that we're on their side, so that we're rooting for them? And this is true whether your hero is a lovable person or whether your hero is a non-lovable person. If your hero is, I don't know, Harry in Harry Potter, he's lovable because he's a disadvantaged kid and he's an orphan and he's being treated poorly. Like we're empathetic people. We are naturally on the side of this character. If your hero is Jane Eyre, guess what? She's an orphan. She's being treated badly by the family that's raising her. She's a disadvantaged kid. We're rooting for her. We're nice people. We're immediately rooting for her. She's also got some pluck. And she's not a complainer, and she stands up and she fights against injustice. She starts to have qualities on page 1 that make us root for her. If your hero is Ebenezer Scrooge, is he lovable? He's not so lovable when we meet him, but we immediately are shown that he is a character whom his world has not given up on. People come and they ask him to make charitable contributions. He says no. But they come and ask him. His nephew comes and says, come to have Christmas with the family, uncle. And he says, no. But his nephew still comes to ask him. And all of a sudden we're like, well, why is he like this? You know, we have an inkling right away that this is a person who needs a journey of spiritual transformation in the worst way. And he's going to get it because the world has not given up on him. That's what we're here for. So we are rooting for Ebenezer Scrooge to go on that journey. In fact, we can't wait to see it. Sometimes it's more fun to root for a character like that, like the main character in Groundhog Day or the Grinch and the Grinch Who Stole Christmas. Like, we're rooting for their transformation precisely because it's so badly needed. So I think I've made my point about rooting for somebody. The reader has to be rooting for your hero in order to feel anything. And all of the racing hearts and panting lungs and, you know, hives and whatever other symptoms you come up with are not going to put emotion on the page if we're not rooting for the hero. The other way that my little baseball analogy holds up is that we understand that the team has lost because we understand how baseball works. Like, when the game is over, it's over, and the one who has the most runs wins. If we didn't know that, and some flurry of activity happened in the bottom of the ninth that caused our team to go from winning to losing, we wouldn't even understand that it happened. We wouldn't know that our team that we're rooting for, that their fortunes just changed, because we wouldn't understand the rules of the game. Now, this is something else that I want you to think about, not only in the world of your story, but scene by scene. What are the rules of the game so that we understand whether your hero's fortunes are rising or falling? That's what's going to get us feeling emotion and urgency. Now, the other thing about urgency, of course, is that what makes us feel if something's urgent? Well, a deadline makes us feel if something's urgent, but only if the deadline has some stakes. If I have a deadline to finish drinking my little glass of water, I could be like, okay, I have a deadline. So what? If I don't make my deadline, I'll just drink it later. It's a meaningless deadline. It has no stakes. But if you've got a deadline that has stakes, or if you just have super high stakes, doesn't need a deadline, then urgency is on the page. So all of this is a way of saying that the emotion and urgency that we sometimes try to fake with this kind of language is actually a property of the storytelling. And you can achieve that in the storytelling by making sure that we're rooting for your hero, which means that we know what we're rooting for, right? We have a sense of who they are and what outcome is wanted, and that we know the rules of the game enough to be able to follow whether we're winning or losing, because that's where our emotions come from. So that's a big one. And as you all know, to me, storytelling is always like the prime answer. Now, here's more of a writing craft, what to do instead. So that's our first what to do instead. Check the storytelling. Make sure that all the emotion and urgency you want is actually in the storytelling. Here's a writing craft one. And it is one of the reasons, actually, and someone mentioned this earlier, that writers do all of this shenanigans with the faces with the faces and the symptoms, is they think that they're showing, not telling. They've been told to show, not tell. And so they think that's what it means. And this is where Anne's comment is connected to this, Anne, because you talked about not describing feelings, but, most of us been taught, well, don't describe feelings, don't tell feelings, just show us the feelings. And so if we want to show feelings, is this how we show them? So this is a real misunderstanding and a commonplace misunderstanding of what it means to show, not tell. When we use smiles and racing hearts and all this other stuff to quote unquote show happy, excited, or, we're telling. These kinds of behaviors are on such a level of cliche that they are simply telling. no offense to anyone who's got butterflies in their stomach right now. I hope anybody who wants to be in love is in love right now. But butterflies in the stomach is not showing anything. It's telling, it's using a cliche, an at-hand phrase to inform the reader of the emotion that you want them to know about, but it doesn't actually show anything because it's an image, right? It's a familiar image. So this notion of showing, not telling, what do we do instead of telling? Well, we could do and probably will do and should do a whole exploration of the dreaded show don't tell advice. But let me give you two tips right now about it. Instead of take me to the urgent care and all that face stuff, think about the idea of gesture. Gesture is such an interesting word, right? What does it mean when someone makes a gesture? It means that they've done something with their body that is intended to communicate something. But not everybody's gestures are the same. And if you really observe people, you'll see that they have body language, right? And that body language, like for me, for example, look what I just did. I just moved my glasses up on my nose. Now, probably my glasses need to be adjusted, but this is a gesture, right? I'm picking up my glass to take a sip of water is a gesture. What do I mean by it? I don't know. Maybe I have a deadline. There, see, I did it. People are in motion. People gesture with their hands, as I do, thanks to my Italian heritage. I adjust the necklace on my, right? Like I'm doing things all the time. And so are you. And so is everyone you see. So I want you to start to pay attention. How do people move? How do they use their bodies? What are they actually doing? Are they wriggling around in their seats, or do they have a ring that they fiddle with? Like really look at people and get a broader, more nuanced vocabulary for what gesture actually is. People are always telling in the poker sense, like what's going on inside. And when I say in the poker sense, anybody who plays poker knows that this is the idea of the tells, the idea of having a poker face that does not reveal what kind of cards you're holding. That's the opposite of what we want to do in fiction, right? We want to actually reveal everything that's going on without having to spell it out in cliches for the reader. So I want you to think about gesture. Gesture can communicate a lot, and gesture need not be in the sole category of a person sort of fussing with themselves, smoothing their hair, like it doesn't have to be that. It includes the way people interact with the environment. And one of my favorite gestures in fiction is in the opening of Charlotte's Web, where Fern's mother, this is like on page 2, it's right at the beginning of the story, is immediately having a little argument with her daughter, who, upon having learned that her father is on his way to the barn to kill a runt pig that was born during the night, gets immediately very upset about it. And she's having a conversation with her mother. And while the mother is responding to Fern, trying to settle her down, she's got a pitcher of cream and she places it on the table. Now, that simple gesture in the middle of this argument of Fern's mother placing a pitcher of cream on the table, to me, is the kind of gesture that, I'm not going to say tell, but informs me as a reader of everything I need to know about that woman's emotional state and what she's feeling. What is she feeling? She's feeling, Fern, you're just a kid. You don't understand. Putting a runt pig to death it's a bit of everyday business on a farm. It's not even worth having an emotion about. It's no big deal. I'm putting a pitcher of cream on the table. It somehow communicates all of that. Meanwhile, Fern is like, her voice is rising and she pushes herself away from the table sort of violently and runs out, and so her body is showing me a different story about her feelings, but there's never any need to describe the feelings. So that's for you, Anne. There's never any need to describe the feelings. The physical gesture is what is actually showing us what's going on. And it doesn't take too much work, does it? Because there's already high stakes in the scene. There's a life and death stakes on the first page of this, middle grade classic. So the reader does not need to be browbeaten into feeling something. It's in the storytelling. What are we rooting for? Well, Fern's a kid and she's upset and the pig's about to be killed. So I think most readers are going to be rooting for Fern to prevent the pig from being killed. Like she's our team. She's the Mets. Like she's the one. We're on her side. Is she going to succeed or not? So the feelings are baked into the storytelling. And so then all you have to do as the writer is just get these like nice, meaningful gestures, and it will take care of itself. And you can trust your reader to know exactly what's going on. Now, one more thing that I want to say about this, and again, we're still on this what to do instead, right? I want you to think about grounding the action of the scene by doing the full imaginative work of the scene. Don't be lazy. In other words, this is a nice way of saying don't be lazy. If all of your characters are smiling with racing hearts and pounding chests and running out of breath, those are generic descriptions. One person's heart doesn't race in a different way than another person's heart. You've done no imaginative work. You're just using cliches, right? Instead, do the real work of imagining physical gesture and behavior that is unique to that character and to every character. And also do the imaginative work of figuring out what is the setting of this scene. Where are they? What's in the room? What are they wearing? What does it smell like? What are the ambient sounds? In other words, run through all five senses and really take a moment to figure out what is the physical reality of this scene. This is part of creating a truly embodied sense in your writing. And this is the true sense of embodiment that we want versus the fake sense of embodiment of all that smiling and cheeks turning red and, churning stomachs. That's fake embodiment. That's not real. But a truly embodied scene is going to have sensory detail that your hero, your protagonist can track through all five senses. And it's unique to that scene. Not every scene in your book is going to take place in the same room. Not every scene in your book is going to smell the same. Not every scene in your book is going to involve characters wearing the same clothes. Every time it's different. This is a lot of work. Now, this is why I say that you need to be very forgiving of yourself in the first drafts. There's no way that any of us are really going to cough up this level of imaginative work in our first draft. Our first draft, for the most part, is designed to work out the storytelling. It is what I hope that you will do in your first drafts, is to prioritize working out the storytelling. Don't prioritize, I wrote 20 pages of description. I had such a good writing day. You might feel good, but you're really no closer to having a story than you were before you wrote the 20 pages of description. So prioritize the storytelling in your drafts and start to cultivate an awareness of what then needs to happen. What needs to happen is that we need to think of our fictional worlds as real, true, live places that have the full range of sensory detail. If E.B. White had not put that scene in the opening of Charlotte's Web in the kitchen with the smell of bacon sizzling in the pan, my friends, he leaves no stone unturned when it comes to good writing, then Fern's mother would not have a pitcher of cream to put on the table, and Fern would not have a kitchen table to push away from in her chair and run out the door. It's the physical setting that provides the opportunity for a fully imagined world in which gesture can happen and in which your characters can have authentic physical experiences, not these fake ones that we give them in our drafts. And I just want to remind you, these generic things do not make you a bad person and they do not make you a bad writer, but they don't belong in your later drafts. You're going to identify them and fix them. I'm going to just take a peek at the comments because I see some really good comments coming up. Oh, Anne has summed it up. Anne says, so rather than giving the reader feelings to mirror, we give them the details of the situation and allow them to react on their own to the happenings of the scene. And I could not have said it better myself. That is really succinct. It is not our job as writers to inform the reader of what feelings to feel. It's our job to do what? Tell them a story. The story will make them feel something or it won't. And I have to tell you, if your story makes your reader feel something, you will have no shortage of readers. Now, this is so important. This is so important. If your story has your readers rooting for that main character to go on that journey of transformation that we understand is urgently needed, whether it's, Ebenezer Scrooge or Jane Eyre, it doesn't matter. It's an urgently needed transformation, and we're rooting for it to happen. And we understand the rules of this world well enough that we can follow along. We can have our own feelings, our own sense of urgency about whether it's working. Are they winning or are they losing? That's a reader who's engaged with the story. That's the reader who's going to stay up all night to finish it and to find out whether the Mets win in the ninth or not, right? That's what we want to give our readers. That's the experience we're really looking for. So fantastic, fantastic. I love this discussion. You guys have asked such wonderful questions. You really, really helped bring this discussion to life. I so appreciate it. That's basically what I've got for you today. So let me just summarize those last few points, right? What do we do instead? We're going to add the emotion and the urgency through the storytelling. We're going to be honest about showing, not telling. So we're not going to fake tell by using this emotions, but truly show through meaningful gesture, right? And we're going to start to be better observers of human behavior so that we have it. And we're going to do the full imaginative work of setting and sensory detail and what is the actual physical world of this story, because that's what's going to make it feel embodied to the reader, not the urgent care symptoms and not the making faces. I hope this conversation has been of benefit to you all. I ask anybody who's here watching on YouTube, if you're not already a subscriber to the channel, I would love it if you subscribed. It would be so nice. And if this content was a benefit to you, you can give it a thumbs up. YouTube likes that. I like it. If you've got questions, if say you're watching on the replay and you have a question that you wished that you could have asked live, it's okay. Put it in the comments below. I'll get a notification and I'll come back and answer it. And once more, anyone who's watching this anywhere who's not already a member of the Path of the Storyteller mailing list, I do invite you to join the list. There's going to be some good stuff coming up now as we get into the season of summer. I'm going to have a new program to offer, and I'm also going to have an enrollment offer for the flagship program, which is going to run in the fall, which I know some of you are already looking forward to. I am already looking forward to it. I can't wait. I love to share that program with writers. All right, my friends, I hope you have a wonderful week of writing until we meet again. And that will be next Wednesday. And if there's something you want me to talk about, just let me know what it is. I really love your suggestions. It's part of where the really good ideas for live streams come from, always happen in conversation with writers. And those of you who've had those conversations with me and then see me jump into a live stream on that very same thing, I'm telling the truth. All right. Happy writing, everyone. I'll see you next week.